Hello and welcome. Today I'm updating you on my project pan, on all the items that I had in my winter project pan, and I've decided I'm gonna switch it out now and move into a spring project pan with all different items. So I'm gonna go through all of my picks for my spring project pan as well. So if you'd like to see that, just keep on watching. All right, starting with everything from my winter project pan. The Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Bronzer in Fair, I used this quite a lot. So I tried to, in all of my videos, do a little asterisk next to any time I used a project pan item. That helps me to keep track of it, and in case you are interested, you can look down in the description box in my videos and see what I'm using and when I'm using it. But I will say overall, for the most part, I used my project pan items off camera. So they were more incorporated into my everyday makeup routine rather than being used and featured in videos. So I used the airbrush bronzer a lot. I thoroughly enjoyed every time I used this. This might be my favorite bronzer. I just love how light it is, which makes it especially good for me in the winter time when I'm so pale. This just adds the right amount of warmth, a little bit of color to the skin, but it doesn't overwhelm at all, and it is so thin and lightweight and buildable that it's really such a pleasure to work with. And as you can see, I did actually hit pan on it, which is wonderful. And if I do use up this whole pan, which I probably will at some point, I would definitely purchase the refill for it. Another bronzer I had in my project pan was the Kosas bronzer. I used this quite frequently. I would say the Charlotte Tilbury one is probably my most used out of all my project pan items, but I use this fairly frequently, and I actually liked to pair it with the Charlotte Tilbury. So it has a similarly light tone, which again is great for me in winter, but this one has a really beautiful shiny finish, and I think it actually pairs really nicely with the matte from Charlotte Tilbury, so you can get a little bit more slight shaping and sculpting with the Charlotte Tilbury one because of that matte texture. And then you can top it off with this one, which I did quite a lot, to just add a little bit more shine and glow. So I really enjoyed using that one as well. The other bronzer that I had in my project was the Gucci bronzer, and again, this was another one that I loved pairing with that Charlotte Tilbury one, again on top of it. So I could get the lighter base and kind of diffuse it a little bit more with the Charlotte Tilbury, and then to deepen it up and add a little bit more shaping, the Gucci one was perfect for that. And I actually loved how this color layered on top of the Charlotte Tilbury. The Charlotte Tilbury is a little bit more yellowy, slightly peachy in its tone. This one I find is fairly cool toned looking in the pan and has kind of a reddish pink undertone to it. But I found often when I use this, it's actually pulled quite orange and warm on my skin. But I find when I layer it on top of a slightly yellower bronzer or even a slightly yellower foundation, this looks a lot more like the color that you see in the pan and has that really nice kind of almost taupey rose type of tone to it. So I've enjoyed that one very much as well and used it fairly frequently. Now for eyeshadow palettes, this is where things go a little bit downhill. So I had the Dior Soft Cashmere palette in my project. I did actually use this quite a lot in January, but really not at all since then. But I did enjoy it when I was using it. I think it's a good palette for kind of the depth of winter because it has those cooler tones, but they're still quite wearable. And this is really great actually for just like one and done looks. You could take any one of these darker shades and do a really beautiful one and done look with that. And I enjoyed it, but again, haven't really used it since January. Another eyeshadow palette that was in my project was the Natasha Denona Trio Chrome palette. I think I only used this once or twice, so I did not get very much use out of that. I don't know why, but I just wasn't going toward it. Maybe because it's more colorful, I do tend to go toward more neutral tones on a daily basis, but I also have a lot of colorful palettes that I was playing around with, so I just didn't gravitate toward the Trio Chrome palette all that much, although I do still love it. The other Natasha Denona palette in the project was the Retro palette. I did use that more, quite a lot more actually than the Trio Chrome, and really enjoyed using that. But I did end up actually removing some of the shades from that palette and putting it into custom Natasha Denona palettes that I was making. So I would say some of the shades got more use than others in that palette. And the other eyeshadow palette in the project was my Pat McGrath Midnight Sun. And that might have been actually the most used eyeshadow palette. I really enjoyed using that throughout the 3 months of this project. I like that you have that mix of neutrals, but you also have that colorful purple tone, which I really enjoyed using in a couple of looks. And the Astral Solstice shade as well is one of my absolute favorite Pat McGrath shades. It's a really bright, sparkly, very light kind of white tone, and it's beautiful as a topper on so many looks. And I did end up using that shade and the palette overall quite a lot over the last 3 months. This MAC highlighter, the Beaming Blush Highlighter, I kind of forgot that this was in the project, to be honest. I forgot to use it, but I did use it a few times and enjoyed it. I think it's a nice accent if you're going for a peachier look, like a slightly warmer look. I think this is a really nice highlighter and has beautiful texture on the skin. The Merit Cream Highlighting Stick in Cava, I used this a ton. This actually may have been the most used item. I use this mostly actually as like a glowy primer underneath my base, but I did also use it as a cream highlighter from time to time, but I got a lot of use out of that, so I'm really happy that was included in the project. Now this Fenty Cream Blush in Bikini Martini. I think I used this only once actually, so that was a little bit of a fail, but it's quite a specific shade and it's just not the type of shade that I wear all that often. I also have the Dior Pink Glow blush, which is a powder, but it's a similar type of shade, and I just tend to go toward that more than this because the powder is just a little bit easier and quicker to just kind of throw on and use as an accent color if I want to, rather than playing around with the cream. But I still think this is really quite a special little blush. Westman Atelier blush in Chouchette I used quite frequently. I'm happy with how much use I got out of that. And this is actually the only item from my winter project pan that I'm going to keep in the spring one because it's a perfect color for spring, really easy to use, and really goes with a lot of looks. So I'm happy to keep that one in the project pan. I had a couple of Pat McGrath blushes in. I used I think Flirtatious and Nymphette were the two that I chose for this project, and I used those quite a lot as well. And I actually usually tended to pair them together, using Flirtatious first because it's such a light neutral tone, and then accenting a little bit with Nymphette. I also went into the shade Nude Venus quite a lot, which wasn't in my project pan, but that was another one that I like to use as a bit of an accent with the Flirtatious shade. The Armani Power Fabric Concealer was also in the project. I used that quite a lot. I think I need to just get rid of it. It's pretty dried out and there's barely any product left in it. I'm still holding on to it though because I like it as a very light shade, and I like it as a comparison for other concealers as well. So that's why I still have it, but it's basically all used up. And then I think the last item was the Burberry Essentials Glow Face Palette, the light one, which I enjoyed quite a lot. This was another one I actually kind of forgot about it for a while, but in the last probably 6 weeks or so, I've been using it a lot more, and especially on an everyday basis. So if I'm doing just a really light base, this works really well with it. The bronzer is a nice light shade, and all of these powders have this kind of metallic sheen to them, but in a really soft way. I think that makes them really perfect for a light makeup, especially if I'm going out, if I have an appointment or something, I'm going to be wearing a mask. So it's a little bit easier to use powders in that case because they're just going to last on the skin a lot better than creams. And for these four here, generally what I would do is I would just mix the two blushes together and then mix the two highlighters together rather than going into the individual shades, because I think by mixing them together I was able to get the most kind of neutral feel from both of these little duos here. Okay, now for everything that's going to be in my spring project pan. So I showed you already the Westman Atelier Chouchette is remaining. Another Westman Atelier product I wanted to bring in is the Lit Up Highlight Stick in Nectar. In general, my vibes for the spring project pan are more colorful than the winter, and I'm really feeling drawn to peach tones, pink tones, peachy pink tones. I think those are going to be really popular for me this season. So a lot of these items are going to fall within that kind of a color spectrum. So this is the Nectar shade of the Lit Up Highlight Stick. It looks quite intensely colored in the bullet there, but it's so sheer. It just has a really slight, very, very slight peachy warmth to it. I think really any skin tone can wear that very easily. Another cream product that I pulled out is the Tower 28 Bronzino Bronzer in the shade Suncoast. So this is another really nice light bronzing shade, and I just haven't used this at all really since last summer, I think. So I wanted to pull it out, and I thought that both the texture and the tone would be really nice to work with during the spring season. Another bronzer I've decided to include is the Victoria Beckham bronzer. I'm sorry, everything here is just covered in cat hair. I wanted to use this because this is another one I just haven't used it that much since last summer. I used it a ton last summer, but it hasn't really been in the rotation since then. And I thought this would be a good replacement for the Gucci bronzer and the Charlotte Tilbury bronzer all in one pan. You've got that nice lighter tone here, and then the deeper tone that you can use for kind of more shaping and depth, and they layer really nicely together as well. And the formula is beautiful and finely milled and a really nice matte bronzer. So I want to get a little bit more use out of that this spring. And then the other bronzer, this one is actually kind of to replace the Kosas bronzer. I pulled out the Sisley bronzer. It's the Phyto Touche Sun Glow Bronzing Gel Powder. So this is a really nice one that has a little bit of a glow to it. It has a lot more depth to it than the Kosas one, but I think that that's totally fine and appropriate for this season coming into the warmer months. I think this is just going to be a really nice addition, and it's going to work well with the other bronzing products as well. I've pulled out 3 powder blushes. Powder blushes I chose were actually both of the Dior Rosy Glow blushes. I just think these are a really great formula, and I love how these tones work on their own, but especially how they work together. I love to layer these two together, and they just create a really nice dimensional kind of balanced tone that still has a nice brightness to it, which I think is perfect for spring. So those are in there. And then I pulled out one of my Hermes blushes, the shade Rose Blush, which again kind of has that peachy, corally tone to it that I think is going to be really nice for the spring season. And I've included one face palette, the NARS Orgasm on the Beach. I've actually been using this fairly frequently recently and really enjoying it, and I just think it's going to be perfect for this season. This is another one kind of replacing actually the Burberry palette because it has similar textures, those baked powders that go on really thin but have a beautiful shine to them, and I think the tones in this palette are going to be perfect for spring. Oh, and then I forgot there's another highlighter. I wanted a single pan powder highlighter, so I've chosen the Dior Forever Couture Luminizer in the shade Golden Glow, which again has that beautiful peachy kind of apricot-y tone, which I'm really into for spring. And again, it has a beautiful baked texture that just glides on the skin and looks really nice on the skin. Moving into eyeshadow palettes, I've got a number of eyeshadow palettes here. The first one is Pat McGrath Utopian Dream palette. I just think this is perfect for spring. It has such nice, vibrant colors. I love these astral shades, and I'm really excited to play with this more. And then I've chosen a few smaller eyeshadow palettes. One is one that is actually not available anymore. It's the Tom Ford Soleil et Lune eyeshadow palette. This is perhaps my favorite eyeshadow palette ever. It's just very special to me personally, and I love these tones. I'm excited to play with the minty tone especially more, and pairing it with those more kind of peachy, springy tones I think is going to be really fun. I've also pulled out the Rowan 75 Degrees quad. Again, more kind of warm tones, but really fun textures to play with in that one. And then the other one, this is kind of to replace the Dior Soft Cashmere. This is the Nude Dress Quint from Dior. Again, you can see by looking at these tones, I think they're just a little bit warmer and a little bit more appropriate for the spring season. So I think that's everything that I have picked out to include in my project pan for spring. I may still add a couple more items, but I'm actually pretty happy with everything I've chosen here. So let me know if you have any questions or comments below. If you'd like to see more from me and you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I'd love for you to do so. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.